Let me ask you about talent ID, right? So on the cover of my book is my son, who I took a cheek swab of him when he was still in diapers and flew it to Australia, and as a window into talent identification, had him tested for athletic traits and told Dion Venter, so what do you think? He said, well, he's in that 17% of the population with, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, predisposed to building slow twitch fiber. So you should probably stay away from all the explosion sports, right? Like, so basketball, explosion. Football, explosion. Tennis, explosion. Soccer, explosion, right? So my kid's not left with a whole lot. But on the other hand, I'm thinking to myself, maybe it's valuable in identifying, not that particular test, but identifying sports that a kid might have success at and starting at an earlier age. And ultimately they said maybe you should try biathlon because he had pretty good hand-eye coordination and seemed to have real endurance as well. I didn't put him in biathlon, by the way. But my question for you guys is this. As we promote a long-term athletic development model, what is the role of talent identification in that model, and should the government or the whatever entity is asking sport bodies to adopt LTAD, should they be asking for a talent identification plan, and where does it get inappropriate? Anyone, I guess?
Vicky or Steve?
Talent ID is a really controversial issue. My definition of talent identification that you are chasing a black cat in a windowless room, dark, and you're wondering is the cat in the room or not.
I agree totally with this round. Obviously, genetics plays a pretty clear role, and we just look around this room and we see people of varying heights, and we can choose certain sports immediately and look at the statistics of who performs in particular sports and who doesn't, just based off that particular parameter. And we know the degree to which certain physical traits are actually determined by genetics. And increasingly, we're seeing the same from research around behavioral aspects. But however, there is, of course, a clear role for the nurture argument and the degree of practice. I think for me, the danger around talent is that a lot of the wave of enthusiasm is based off very, very specific, definitive projects. Some of them conceivably relatively early recruitment, but many of them somewhat later. I think we need to ensure that around our talent, that we allow opportunity to play as large a role as possible, and every child is given an opportunity. There are so many variables that actually determine the ultimate outcome, if you're looking at it from a performance point of view, that the actual predictability of performance outcomes a decade, 2 decades later is relatively slim, and the world is littered with failed, expensive, so-called talent ID programs. And if you look at the academic literature, the use of the word talent is used very, very carefully and advisedly. And unfortunately, in sport, in the same way we use high performance, elite performance in general, we tend to water down those terminologies to almost non-existent meanings. And so in the area of talent, we need to have a sort of smorgasbord approach. We need to understand the role of participation with as large numbers as possible, but at the end of the day, there are limiters, there are filters in the overall process. Height was just one I happened to mention, but let's not forget the brain as well.
I think my reading of what's out there is that we can probably predict with a moderate degree of accuracy whether somebody will be okay at an activity. They could be pretty good. But if we think that we can pick the one who's going to be the world champion, the one who's going to be the Pele of soccer, I think we are just chasing an illusion. And I just would like us to stop talking about talent ID and start talking much more about talent retention. How do we keep people in the sport long enough for them to show their real potential?
So what is the age at which talent ID is appropriate? Maybe we just go roll right through the table here.
I think when somebody gets on the podium, we can say we've identified them.
Well, I mean, you know, one thought I had was, I mean, could we use PE teachers better, right? I mean, talent ID already happens. The tall kid in the school gets, you know, the basketball coach picks him out and puts him on team, figuring, hey, you might have success at this sport. But what about, you know, in the U.S., school offers a limited number of sports. They might all be explosion-based sports. I mean, school might not have a fencing team, might not have a badminton team, might not have rowing, but there's some club in the area, right, that you could hook that. Maybe the PE teacher becomes a connector to a sport that a kid might have some interest in. Is that a crazy idea?
Okay, I'm sorry to hog it, but I think you've identified and commingled two things.
Okay.
One is the phys ed teacher as talent identifier, and the second is the phys ed teacher as the talent director, giving people the opportunity to take part in lots of different activities. I think the second part is fabulous. PE teachers and everybody else should be directing people to as many different activities as they think they will do well in. I'm a physical educator, don't shoot me. I don't think any physical education teacher I've ever met has any ability or any training to be able to say, this is going to be the future star. And even if it were possible, I think they would be so restricted. How many phys ed teachers are really good to be able to say, I think you'd be great at luge. I think you'd be, I'm sorry, Richard, it's, this kid would be fabulous at, taekwondo. I mean, they have such a limited repertoire that I just don't think that's a starter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.